Hey, Matthew, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's so great to have you. For anyone that doesn't know, Matthew helps Cadence with footwear design. And, when I first started, it's like, wow, it's going to be so cool to design shoes. But that is such an intricate process. And I'm more well versed in the digital design. And we're so happy to have you on our team helping us with making sure that our shoes look great. So, if you could take a couple minutes and tell people a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, what you're working on.
Sure. My name is Mathew Drazic. I've been a footwear designer since I left school. So I've been for about 25 years. And I've worked at places like New Balance and Converse and Diesel and got a performance and style background. And then I started my own brand called Agency Footwear after a long time being in the industry to try and work on social and environmental justice causes.
That's awesome. I'm curious, what did inspire you to start designing shoes?
Sure. I always wanted to design shoes. There will be people that I went to junior high with that'll tell you that I had little sketches of shoes in my notes. My art teacher in high school helped me figure out that was industrial design. And
Oh,
then I
okay.
went and then I went to school for industrial design. I kind of wanted to be an architect in there because I didn't know what industrial design was at the
hmm
time. But yeah, then I figured that out, and then it was product design. But for me, it was never really about generic product design. It was always about shoe design.
So, for someone that doesn't know, what is it like working for a company like New Balance that we, of course, all know, or Converse? What's that like? I imagine it like this sort of glamorous experience where, there's all these people hovering around, sketches and stuff. Is it like that, or what is it actually like? And only share only what you're comfortable sharing about that
Of
experience.
course, I'm comfortable sharing all of it. Really, it isn't. It isn't. The biggest perk is you get to travel for inspiration. And more so when I was at Diesel, but we did it at New Balance too. But Diesel, we could go anywhere and look and just shop and look for inspiration, cultural inspiration, and anything that was different and new that wasn't really filtered out into the marketplace. When I was at New Balance, it was more of performance, innovation, and trade shows and materials and finding that. You also have to travel a lot to the factories,
hmm
um, and which is not as glamorous, especially 20 years ago. The factories weren't as fancy as they are today,
Yeah,
but it's a great experience regardless. And then the the interesting part and the pressure of it is that regardless of your background, like some people went to, let's say, RISD or Pratt or just high end design schools. You have CCS, you have Art Center, and I came from a school called Western Washington University. Not only that, but I left school early. So what's interesting is you just do a drawing of a shoe and you put it up on a wall, and it doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter if you went to school at all. If you can draw a shoe that makes sense and you can tell the story of what it is, or the shoe itself, better yet, can tell the story itself so you don't even have to sell it. And the decision makers, whether sometimes the CEO comes, but very rarely, but marketing and development and everybody at the high end, whether you're an intern or not, you can have your drawing up on a wall. So it is a
that's so
lot.
cool. That must
Yeah,
be a
it's
really
very talent
empowering
based.
sort of experience, I would imagine.
Yeah, especially when I was an intern. That was probably the most empowering part of it. After that, you have to learn how to make the designs not personal and understand
hmm
that you're functionally working for a client, and that client is the brand that pays you to do what you do.
That's so interesting. And maybe you can speak a little bit to this. When I first started working for Cadence, I had no idea what goes into making a shoe and the materials and how that all comes together. You look you look at something like this and you're like, oh, cool. Yeah, this seems simple. But
Mhm.
then once I start walking the factory floor and the floors of the component factories, I'm like, wow, there's at least 12 different factories involved in making this particular one shoe and all the materials that go together. It's like a sandwich almost, if you want to think about it that way. But maybe you can speak a little bit about the technicality, materials, and that kind of stuff that goes into designing a shoe.
Yeah, it's a little bit of what your company can source, and some of it is looking for new technologies and finding those new technologies, and not just technologies that help your consumer, but also technologies that help the manufacturer build a more efficient shoe.
Mm-hmm.
And so that comes with learning the machinery that is actually in the factory floor, or whether a knit is a 3D knit or a flat knit, and how molds work. So, but at the end of the day, it still starts as a drawing.
Right.
And that drawing has to convey an emotion and get people excited, and people have to think it's cool. So it's weird because you have to, sometimes the more you know, the less it helps. It helps to
That's
be
interesting.
naive sometimes when you're designing a shoe, and you just draw something that looks cool, and then that's one side of it, but also you start with the parameters that are needed for that particular shoe. It could be a casual shoe, could be a performance shoe, it could be an assisted mobility shoe. It doesn't matter. They're all kind of the same because you're given parameters from basically the marketing team or the development team.
Got it. So how do you typically approach when somebody like Cadence approaches you? What do you have like an investigative stage? What do you ask questions? How do you approach a new project?
Questions is the biggest one. What are the must-haves for the client? That's probably the biggest. Who the consumers are, and the clients on that side, and always keeping the customer first mentality, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's the ease of entry into the shoe, whether it's the colors that will make them feel lighter, or the materials themselves that will actually make the shoe lighter, make the shoe easier to use. So focus on the customer first, and then remember that, you have to work within the parameters. So for me, the other part of it is, and this is kind of like a secret of the design world, is a lot of designers are dyslexic.
Huh. I didn't know that.
Or, dyslexic adjacent. So we kind of see in patterns a little bit differently. And we just kind of can go with instinct on that, and just what flows and how space and negative space and how it all works together. And then putting things in a three-dimensional form, going from a drawing to a three-dimensional form, and thinking about the shoe always as a biomechanical aid, regardless
Mm-hmm.
of whether it's a performance basketball shoe or an assisted mobility shoe.
So do you typically start out with like a silhouette of what the shoe is going to be like and then dive into materials and colors? Is that the process?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a cliche, the last comes first. That's our
Yeah.
saying,
Can you
right?
explain what a last is? I suspect a lot of folks
Sure.
that are going to be listening to this won't know.
The last is the foot form that the shoe is based off of. And every company has their own last, or a version of one. So it's whether it's made out of plastic or metal or wood. The traditional ones were made out of wood, sculpted with clay and hardened. Um, and and that's how every shoe is made. So you have to start with this foot form. And sometimes it's a pointed toe, sometimes it's a round toe. More often than not, in the case of what we're doing, it's a wider toe box with a round toe to make sure that it's more accommodating, more comfortable. But also that also builds in your heel height.
Yeah.
And so those are really the main parameters to start. Like, that's the form you start with. And then you functionally, visually sculpt around that. With Cadence, we have we have the pucks on the front, and that builds a lot of the form into the shoe. Yeah, you have these low friction pucks, and then you have the high friction grip in the middle. And so that is a huge part of the aesthetics, but then you can add the details. And when it comes to the materials, in colors, that can start at the very beginning, or it can be a part of the process. It all depends on what is the most important aspect of the shoe.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And when I first joined Cadence, one of the things that my co-founder Tyler told me is they just completed a beta trial the year prior, and almost everyone in the beta trial loved the function of the shoe because it made walking easier. But beyond that, they were like, I'm so happy it looks like a regular sneaker and doesn't make me stand out more. So, that was the light bulb moment for me where I'm like, okay, we need to have a stunningly branded product and it needs to look great. And so I'm so thankful that we have talent like you on our team that can help us make sure that our shoes look fantastic and, timeless and something that people are proud to wear. So kudos to you for making, our collective vision and mission happening here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an honor to be part of the team.
So after New Balance and Converse and all these name brands that we all know and like, what made you depart corporate, and what's Agency Footwear all about?
Yeah, so Agency Footwear is my own brand that is for social and environmental justice. And I found that I couldn't really pursue that motivation within corporate America. So that was the motivation to leave. But that came all the way back to just like, for me, having been doing this for such a long time, I got to witness kind of the stratification of society during my career. Corporate America didn't follow the same policies today that it did in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. It started to shift in the 70s and 80s, and I didn't necessarily realize that. I was pretty young when I started my career in the 90s. And then all those took effect. And so now we have a society that is very obviously more stratified than it has been in a very long time. And, that means that the working class and marginalized communities kind of get left out. And that's where I came from. I was promised as a kid, this multicultural melting pot of just kind of beautiful harmony in society and the potential of what America could be. And so I felt as if it just seemed like we were trending in the wrong direction from what I was promised as a kid. And I wanted to do my part to help us get back to that promise and fulfill that promise. And so as a shoe designer, that is not easy. There are not a lot of paths to be able to use that skill set. So I actually thought about leaving shoe design altogether. But since I left school early, I couldn't really go back to school and become a lawyer. It would have been hard to go back and follow that path.
Probably also an unlikely career transition if you're realistic.
Very unique in career path. But yeah, so I just figured out how to do it within shoe design. And ultimately what product design teaches us is problem solving. And so what I did was I gave myself, my client became marginalized communities. And how could I problem solve to help the people who have been fighting for social and environmental and economic justice for centuries? How could I add design into that, and not necessarily shoe design? Just how could design become an element of that, and how could it fight for that? And ultimately, what I'm best at is shoe design. It's how I can make the biggest impact. There are other designers like the Shepherd Fairies of the world that work on the graphic design to help make a bigger impact when it comes to the Hope poster, right? And different movement posters like that. And so I just focused on what I could do best. And that's where Agency Footwear came from.
So did you, for that particular design process, did you invite those marginalized groups to, ask questions and start the design process? What was that like?
Yeah, as a person, solo entrepreneur trying to figure this out, I didn't know how to bring about everybody
Yeah,
as a client, right?
it's difficult.
Yeah. That said, I've always volunteered. Throughout my entire career, my very first job, even was the first time that I volunteered to paint a mural, on a school or for a school that was in an underserved community in Philadelphia. And so ever since then, whether it was Philadelphia or Boston or LA or New York, I've always volunteered. And through that, I got to understand just how difficult it is for nonprofits to raise money and how beholden to the people who gift them money that they are. And so I wanted to find a revenue stream for them. So I didn't exactly ask them per se, but I did design to the functions that activists do. Those are the people on the front lines.
Yeah.
And I started to treat them like the athletes. So I problem solved for them and what they do all day, and it became a shoe that was performance driven in that sense, because that's what needs to happen. And like people who walk all day or stand on their feet all day or don't know where their day is going to take them, they need a versatile shoe that can work on multiple surfaces and it can be comfortable all day. But also they want to be able to live their values. So the shoe has to be as sustainable as possible. It has to have messaging that supports the greater good and stuff like that. So that's kind of how it netted out.
And so what does that look like now?
The shoe's behind me. That's what it looks like. Yeah. So Agency Footwear at agencyfootwear.com is a collaboration with the Gathering for Justice, actually a formal partnership with them where the sales of every shoe goes to them. The net proceeds go to the Gathering for Justice, so that money from the sales of shoes goes directly towards helping those on the front line of creating change and positive.
That's amazing. You're making direct impact with every single sale.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, kind of like you guys. Kind of like Cadence. It's kind of like every single sale goes towards to make somebody who's working with their mobility a little bit better. And for me, and this may come up later in the questions, I feel like Cadence is working to support an underserved community.
Yeah. Well, let's jump right in. So I typically ask for first impressions when people meet with us and what those were, because I think it's fascinating to hear what someone's first thoughts were when they heard about a shoe that is designed for walking difficulties. So over to you. What were your first impressions?
My first impression of the shoe was how elegant of a solution it was, and for the complex challenge that the consumers face. And so whether they're wearing an AFO, which I didn't even know what that was when I started working
neither
with you guys. Yeah. Or understanding how drop foot works, understanding how ankle mobility is limited in certain situations, or how how the foot and the leg work together in that walking situation, how it's asymmetrical more often than not. And so, yeah, my first impression was just how elegant of a solution it was and how it simplified a complex problem.
Yeah. Understanding, it's so fascinating because we serve such a broad variety of a community. The shoe could be good for someone that's just simply a little bit of an older age and has a harder time walking. Could be someone post-stroke, could be someone with multiple sclerosis and foot drop, and you go down the list, and everyone's so unique in their needs. So how did knowing that there's such unique needs, how did that influence the design process when you endeavored it?
it goes back to what you said at the very beginning, in that regardless of the unique need, a lot of people don't want to be defined by their challenge. The biggest challenge of
Yeah.
their life isn't a story they want to tell every single time they go for a walk. And so it was more about taking these different scenarios and creating something that fit into culture and mainstream culture a little bit more comfortably.
Yeah.
And when it comes to every foot is different regardless. Even for people who don't have mobility challenges, their left foot is different from their right foot. And,
Yeah.
every single one. So it's really hard to fit everybody every time. And I've come to that conclusion over the years that you just try to make the best solution for the most amount of people that you can. And so it was really more about, like you said, creating something that isn't so wild and obvious, that it's trying to serve a specific challenge.
That's fascinating. So how did that materialize in the shoe? What are sort of the standout beyond the variable friction technology that we of course have patented, but what are sort of this design call-out features that you want to highlight?
Sure, it's about the comfort. We worked a lot on the knit as well, and making sure that we could get the right colors for the knit, the right texture,
Oh,
the
that's
right
so cool.
pattern.
You still have some of those.
Yeah, of course. And just kind of making sure that they weren't too bold, but they also weren't too boring, and that they fit into the lifestyle of everybody. So it was, and making sure it was comfortable, that it was light, and accommodating. And one of the things that knit allows us to do is to fit various shoe shapes or foot shapes, and even AFOs if necessary, in a more comfortable way.
Yeah.
So there's like no break-in needed. It's about the materials, and the specific one being the knit was probably the biggest thing.
So how do you think about colors when you design for a client like us that has limited resources? We're not Nike or Hoka or OnCloud for that matter.
Right.
That
Right. We don't have the big color department. We don't have the big material
exactly.
department. Yeah,
We'd
that's
love to, but we're not there yet.
right. That's what I would have done in the past. I would have gone to the color expert, and then I would have gone to the material library and been like, "What's the cool new stuff?" But for us, we have to be pragmatic. But also, the biggest thing probably is thinking ahead. From the time we start the design to the time the shoe sells and goes on sale, whether it's 6, 12, or 18 months, sometimes 2 years, especially when you're developing your very first one with new technology, that takes a long time. And so you have to, again, like you said earlier, you have to be timeless. You can't, sometimes you don't want to go too wild, but then also you want to have some fun and you want to bring levity to it. So people like to wear, let's say, a blue, but they don't always want that blue to be the same boring blue, but they don't want it to be, we're not working with a team-based structure either, right? So if you look at blues for a lot of performance brands, they can line up with whether it's the New England Patriots, the Seattle Seahawks, or for me in soccer, it's more of the Kansas City or whatever that wears blue.
Yeah.
And so for us, it's more about how does it fit into their lifestyle, their home, what they wear, and what they're currently wearing, so that our clients will it'll fit into their lifestyle that they already have. They'll understand it, but also it will just kind of give a little spark of happiness. Oh, this is just a little bit different. This is a little bit fun, and just kind of provide that levity.
Yeah, no, and I think the versatility of it all too that was one of the surprising feedbacks we've gotten throughout this past year, was the request for a sneaker that has a little bit of a dressier appeal and some people are like, why is the shoe sole white on this? I can't wear it to the office. I'm like, well, I guess that makes total sense that you wouldn't wear something like that to the office. And, imagine a lawyer's office or something like that where you can't do that. So we addressed that. And I think those were some of the more interesting learnings that we've had so far. How, looking into 2025, what sort of color trends do you see? Where would you like Cadence to see go and endeavor next?
Yeah, I would like to see Cadence get a little bit more fashion friendly, but also, everybody's different, right? So some people are very bold. Some people are very fashion forward. Some people want to be the center of attention. And then some people want to just kind of be known for their personality instead, want to be known as a speaker or as a presenter or as a professional. And so it's providing for as many different personality types as possible. And my hope for Cadence is that we can cater to as many people in personalities as possible. Because again, when people have challenged mobility, that has nothing to do with their personality, and that doesn't necessarily define them. And so it's just bringing back their personality and giving them that back, even though they're facing a challenge.
Where do you see the adaptive footwear space go in general? I know a lot of companies have dabbled with zippers and easier to get into sort of devices and footwear. What are some of the other trends that you're seeing beyond what we do at Cadence? My
mobility research is focused on Cadence, so outside of what you guys do, for me, what I see is I'm hoping that we can get to a point where businesses and communities work together instead of right now. I feel like the majority of businesses use communities to fund their executive lifestyle. And so, I view things from a much bigger, zoomed out perspective. And so that's the big goal when it comes to like whether it's earth tones or whether it's, whether it's brights, whether it's neons, what is going to be that hot new color. That's a little bit more minute in my thinking. And so I feel like on the kind of the bell curve of adoption, right? We all know it in the tech industry because we know that there are the early testers, there's early adopters, there's mainstream, then there's laggards, and you follow this bell curve of product adoption, and that's across the board on everything, whether that's colors or whether that's technology. And that also that affects social change.
Yeah.
Because social change, there are people that I talk to often that are very on the front foot, or no pun intended, but on the leading edge of social change. And they're the ones out in the streets leading that charge. And then that becomes policy. And then that policy becomes a culture driver. And then there is mainstream adoption once it's actually like, oh, this policy is well liked. And so, the challenge is making something that works for those on the leading edge of adoption and those in the mainstream that are just now getting to it. And so I'm sure that goes for the mobility challenge as well. Because there's carbon fiber, there's, in with Tyler, your co-founder, the robotics and prosthetics background, it's materials, it's titanium, it's molding processes, 3D printing, it's being able to bring that in and make that work in a way that's palatable and it's palatable for a broader audience.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned is working with the community actually on the product and the brand itself. That's something that we have noticed, or I've noticed more consciously in the past few months, but in particular, last Friday we did a community Q&A, and it was the feeling was palpable that people are grateful that we've given them the black sneaker that they've asked for. So it's, that the co-development with the community and being directly engaged with the community is something where I feel like Agency Footwear and also Cadence have a large overlap. And so that's really cool. From your perspective, how does it feel to you to know you're directly impacting with your designs how people are able to walk or walk a little better? How's that feel to you?
I mean, it's quintessentially heartwarming. It's amazing to be able to actually help people. Like, I've helped people, when you do performance tennis shoes or when you do stylish shoes, some of my shoes have been worn on stage by major musicians or worn on
Which is
the court
really cool.
or professional athletes, and I'm not to be that, but, and been a part of international marketing campaigns. And that's really cool. And it feels really nice, but it does not hold a candle to being able to help somebody walk better. It does not hold a candle to being able to connect a community and help positive change for the greater good. And that's something that's been missing most of my career, because for corporate America, you work on their goals and you work on the profit margins and the ability to reward shareholders. Your investment in the community is what they can do for the company. And whereas Cadence and Agency Footwear, it feels very much like the company wants to be a part of the community, and the investment in the community is how can we help the community? How can we support the community? How can we make your life easier? And so there's nothing more fulfilling than being able to use your skill set to be able to help the greater good for me. And especially as a shoe designer, it's very rare. It's hard to come by.
Yeah, it's same for me as an executive for a company. I feel very honored to be part of this endeavor, and feels like we're just an umbrella for our community, that the brand is, that everybody can assemble under in that safe space, and really a place of empowerment for them. And just providing that space to our community just feels really good. So to round out our show, where can our community connect with you and what you do at Agency Footwear, and what's ahead for you guys?
And what was that last question?
And what's ahead for Agency Footwear?
Sure. So for Agency Footwear, you can go to agencyfootwear.com. At Agency Footwear as well, you'll find us on all the socials. And that's where we sell our shoes, directly through our website. And like I said, every shoe helps support those on the front lines of change, in positive change and following Kingsian nonviolence and building coalitions. So that's the huge thing for Agency Footwear, and what we're doing and what's coming ahead for us is building that community and being more entrenched and kind of like you, getting more feedback from the community and learning, but also expanding our reach and getting involved with more people that are out on the front lines. And it's hard for companies to take a stance on things because you want to have a very broad audience. But with agency, it's about personal agency, it's about collective agency, and it's about the greater good, which I feel like is very similar with Cadence. And I love that the name itself and the logo stands for, providing this ability to walk, of this mobility standard. And I just kind of love that, how the name itself speaks to it versus, being the name of a person,
Right.
or, feeding an individual ego, or a place. And so actually empowering the people that are wearing the shoes. So I love that. And that's what's ahead for us.
Awesome. Well, hey, Matthew, thank you so much for coming on the show. We're so excited for all the future designs that we're going to be launching together with you, that you'll help us to create. We feel like we're in very good hands with with you and footwear design, and we'll make sure that our community is best served and has something that they're excited to wear. So once again, thank you for coming on the show, and we'll see you on the next one.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.